Okay, we officially start now.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So initially, I was, concerned about how Hans decides about. That was my initial question because I presented him in the first place as an artist who uses or who employs varieties of mediums, and so my initial question was about how he decides about which medium to pick when you are aiming to express yourself in an artwork.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that my approach is not very intelligent. So if I were smart, I would only make small watercolors, or I would only write. But unfortunately, I happen to make many things in many forms and many mediums. And it's, I told you yesterday that, to put it pathetically, you don't choose your work, but your work chooses you somehow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So at some point it's the work that takes over. And so I ended up making these very big immersive installations because they needed a certain scale in order to be immersive. So surrounding you, engaging all your senses. Mm-hmm. And if it then is too small, you don't physically walk through it or sit down in it or experience it as a staged atmosphere. And so certain things need certain dimensions. Right. And I made a lot of very big constructions in order to stage something very small. Mm-hmm. Meaning like a place of tranquility or a place of quietness. And so the medium might be spectacular in its means, but when it comes to what it delivers, it is rather small and intimate. Mm-hmm. So I never had any strategy whatsoever when it came to the use of media. It all happened very spontaneously and organically. And I always somehow opposed when people said or asked me whether I was a conceptual artist, with all due respect, because the conceptual art is an incredible, strong direction within the arts. But I'm really a studio-based artist, meaning that I'm painting the watercolors, I'm working with my team to sculpt. We put up the big shows together. Mm-hmm. So I'm assisted by a wonderful team of 7 people who worked with me the whole year through. And it's something. Also, the people that work with me are more like enthusiasts rather than hyper specialists. So it's not technical people with technical responsibilities within the studio. It's rather like people who like the parcours or the mm-hmm. who like my trail or my research, who joined to help me to make it happen.
Right.
And it's not logical. It's as I told you yesterday, in 2018 I will be directing and stage designing 2 opera pieces, and I don't know whether I can pull it off. So it makes me not nervous, but in a very nice way, enthusiastic and happy, and I feel challenged. And I think the alternation between all the different media has something to do with also willing to go out of your comfort zone, which for mm-hmm. me is very important.
To try something different.
To try something I haven't done before, and to see how I can deliver something within that direction. Mm-hmm. So when I wrote and directed the first theater play, I didn't know whether I could do that. And then the sensation that it might be a disaster as well mm-hmm. is something very appealing to me. Mm-hmm. So if I would be always in the safe zone, I wouldn't be an artist, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So I love to see what I can do and how I can learn. So I hope somewhere in the future I might make a feature film, like a long duration movie. And therefore now I'm trying to skill myself as a director. So yes. I was directing theater plays and now I'll do the opera work, and I wrote 2 theater plays, and so step by step I'm learning the script writing, improving, learning how to direct, because the visual side, like creating scenes, creating stage design, is something I somehow now know how to do, and so that's rather comfortable, and so I have to add uncomfortable things so I can keep learning.
Great. So this is why you have produced immense amount of work up to today, until today, I believe. I mean, I want to concentrate on another thing actually. Since you mentioned that you enjoy working on different forms or different media actually, when you are producing your artwork, I mean, it seems to me that you have a special idea of form in your mind, because whatever we look at is produced by you. I mean, be it watercolor or sculpted works or films and videos and whatever, they're all quite absolutely well formed and finished, I believe. Yeah. And so I wonder really if you have a special idea of form in your mind, and if there's some kind of references which you can refer to about your concept of form.
Yes, when I studied art, quite some of my teachers were minimalists, and so when I went to art school and started in the painting department, my drawings were hyperly detailed, and it's because I was a kind of a nerdy kid. I was always the last to be selected for the football team because I simply couldn't play. I was
I'm not surprised at all.
I was very shy, and I wasn't popular amongst the sportive kids. But then a way to be accepted by the others was I knew how to draw, and I think when I was a kid I was reading comic books and I was drawing comic books. And my feeling for detail and for the pictorial, you could say, comes from there. And when I was studying art, and I had teachers who were more like meta artists, so people producing art about art or the making of art, it to me felt not like my domain. And I first tried to make drawings in a more simple way, like just a line or some dots, or I really try to reduce. I try to use the less is more idea, and then at some point I thought, well, maybe less isn't more for me. Maybe I have to do a lot. So I think at some point it's important as an artist to embrace the kind of person you are. And there are fantastic artists. I have a very eclectic taste when it comes to art, so I can appreciate Donald Judd, but also Thomas Hirschhorn. So those are completely different artists. And by now that I'm in my 40s, I believe that in any definition of art, there's always intriguing and interesting people you can find. And but at some point, I thought, well, I'm not a minimalist. I'm not an abstract artist. I'm a figurative artist. I'm a comic book lover. So. I love a narrative aspect, I love detailing, I love the figurative language as my voice. And then I think what first is, when you study art and people somehow make you believe it's a kind of an obstacle, that you detail too much. I think at some point you have to accept that you are this kind of person, and then you have to try to bend it into a quality. So you can only be the best yourself, I can only aim to be the best possible Hans op de Beeck. That's what I can strive for, but I can't be Anish Kapoor. I can't be someone else with, with a different language and a different background and so on. And therefore I also always departed from what I know, my own modest background, my own the place I grew up in, and all kinds of autobiographical things are like a hidden agenda that somehow appears in my work. I never want to articulate it as something important, because it's not. It's just the banality of someone's life. I have a very boring life. Well, the art making is very exciting, but aside from that, I don't do drugs. You know, I don't have crazy stories. I'm not, you know, a rock and roll person. So I'm quite boring, I think.
So you're not very much like your English, you know. I mean, you know, new artist actually is you know, you're into your face kind of artist, right? Not very much like that, I believe.
No. I'm not the loudest voice in the visual art, I think.
Okay.
So I try to keep it quiet, and that's also, I guess, a bit my Belgian roots. Like, we're more quiet people, and I think you can't avoid it. It always comes through. So it always is part of your language, whether you want it or not. And sometimes they ask me, you're a Belgian artist, so you must be related to René Magritte and the surrealism and all that. And who knows? But not consciously, but
right.
But for sure I have this kind of Belgian background, and for sure it will be present in my work.
No, absolutely. No, certainly. And yeah, well, I mean, since you explain this idea of form with regard to your own, you know, peculiarities of thinking and creating forms, I'd like to, you know, go from this point to some series of works like, you know, location series, and maybe, I mean, the audience is not quite familiar with the location series here, but Hans' first location series was the traffic lights, right?
Yes.
One. And it was, I mean, kind of a big, huge installation space, I mean, one-to-one construction of a crossroads where you will see only some traffic lights, and the traffic lights flickering in and out continuously. And so there will be no one in the space. And so everything, I mean, everything there, you know, which are included in this scene, they were so well formed and designed, but completely empty. So how would you, you know, explain this emptiness in this, you know, work, or would you call it emptiness in the first place?
Yes, I made a lot of large-scale installations that you can walk through or sit down in, and what I try to do is to make something fake authentic. So once they asked me to make an artist statement, and I said I believe in the authenticity of fake. Because you can construct something which is undeniably fake, but there's always a point that you can bring it to the point that it becomes an experience, and the experience can be authentic. So, as one can be moved by a movie, for example, knowing all the time, of course, that it is a construction, that it's a mock-up, that it's a fake reality. You can be profoundly moved by a character in the film, or by a character in a novel. And this is what I always try to communicate as well, that when you're receptive for art, you can live 3 lives in one go, you know. You get more out of life, simply because you can find a lot of authentic feelings in the depiction or the representation of the world through the arts. It is extra intensity, it is added value to your life. And so I will always promote whatever kind of form, whether very accessible or whether very hermetic, any form of art as something to enrich your life with.
All right. No, I mean, I asked this question because, you know, when the spectators, they move into your installations, like, for example, in the collector's house or the lounge, or people, as we'll see later on in the gallery, you know, everything looks, it's in the right place, actually, right? I mean, each and every object there is quite well represented. I mean, it is just really, you know, very finely formed there. But somehow, you know, when you get into your space, you get into your, you know, installations, you feel somehow spooky, you know, something eerie going on there, and something sinister, really. And this sinister, I mean, this idea of sinister actually, some critics of Hans, they wrote about this by reference to Freudian idea of the uncanny. And do you enjoy this idea of the uncanny? Well, I mean, in relationship to your works?
Well, whatever people like to to project on what I do is fine to me. The big sculptural installations I produce, they are handcrafted, so that's to me important. I wouldn't make an installation using these chairs, for example, because they are ready-made. So the fact that I treat them, that I make a sculptural interpretation of every banal, daily life-like object, turns it into something else. Mm-hmm. As if it were found by an archaeologist, for example. You know, like if I make that chair as a sculpture, I probably make it in plaster or so, that you can't even sit on it. So it becomes something else. It's not the functional object. It's not something that is bought in a store. It is something that is crafted, that took time. Mm-hmm. That is a representation of the idea of a chair rather than a chair itself. And by working in this representational way, I want to make worlds that are staged, that are false, and there's no denial whatsoever that they are false. If I would make an installation with this very carpet and those chairs, it would look like a simulation. Mm-hmm. With all the things that surround us here, I could simulate a conference room. But then, if I would do it that's painstakingly real, with real objects, I think it would fail. By handcrafting everything, you make an interpretation, there's no denial it's an interpretation, so it is not about simulating anymore, but rather about evoking, about evocation. So I try to evoke a mood. When you walk through, the Collector's House was an installation of 250 square meters that some of you might have seen in Art Basel. It was like a totally grey, black and white representation of a fictitious collector's house. Mm-hmm. Like a pompous neoclassical nonsense space, but it was all silent because everything was grey and there was a bit of black and white. And so the only colourful thing in the installation, that was you as a spectator. So you stood out, even if you didn't want that, but the colourful thing was you, and you were, as a spectator, as a visitor, the lively element, and all the rest was quiet, as if everything was turned into stone or so. It was very still, inert, frozen. And I think this creates this friction, or this, what you refer to as something sinister or strange. And that's something I'm aiming for, that you can instantly relate to the spaces I create, whether it's in the theater or in a film. And later on we will be showing the film here. It's something you can identify with, because it's not a kind of hilarious fantasy genre. It's rather something quite close to the world as we know it, but then shifted into something else because of the material. And so this is why, as I said earlier on, I don't consider myself a conceptual artist, because the works grow in the studio. And so the research to sculpt a bottle, for example, is something that you do with your hands, and it's something very tactile and physical, and something which is not departing from an idea that then can be realized by someone else, but it's really like the whole research of developing at the studio and making decisions along the way. So I can't preconceive something and then asking someone to produce it. It needs the whole being on the road. For an actor, it's for example, really nice to rehearse. You know, the rehearsals are maybe even more interesting than performing the play for the audience, because it's the whole research, it's the thinking, the tasting of the words, it's the developing, and as you could say, like the travel is more important than the destination somehow. But then, of course, I'm not an artist who says the making is more important than showing the work, because I'm fully aware that the work needs to communicate and needs to be received by the audience in order for it to exist. And so I can make a lot of stuff and keep it in my house, but then it's not art. It becomes art when it's received by an
Sure,
audience.
no, absolutely.
And I'm very aware of that. So I always try to create works in a way, or present them in a way that you can decide for yourself how much time you spend with it. I don't like to put pressure on the spectator. So also for the film, you will see later after this talk, when we switch on the video projection, you can watch this film for 5 seconds and get something from it, or you can watch it entirely. And this is something I'm very conscious of. I don't want to push you as a spectator, like, please sit down and watch it for half an hour. So I want to keep my invitation as an image maker as open as possible, so you never feel like you have to, but that there is a possibility. This is my proposition to you, and hopefully you're receptive for it, but I don't want to be pushy in what I do. So it's sometimes when you go to the theater and they try to involve spectators on the stage, I will be the last that they would have to ask to do that. Because I don't want to be pushed, like I like to have a form of freedom when I walk through an exhibition space and calmly decide for myself. And I hope I can create this kind of atmosphere for the viewer, that you feel invited but not pushed. And this is why my work is never aggressive or loud. I try to keep it quiet so that you can take your time and see what you do with it.
So you're not looking for complete integration with your work, from the audience, I should say.
A complete integration?
With the work itself, or immersion actually into the work.
Well, I hope that my work is immersive, that it really does something to you, but I can't be pushy in the way I do that.
All right. But if you can manage this in 5 seconds, it's a great achievement actually, isn't it? No, thank you for this distinction between simulation and, what do you say about that?
Simulation and evocation.
Evocation,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
That's a very good distinction, I believe. And so that's why you, prefer to produce, for example, one-to-one scale, structures, I believe. But whenever one steps into your, installations, one feels not quite alienated, really. Alienation is not the right word for that, I believe, right? And neither the uncanny. And because the sense that you get as a spectator, being included in your installations, is this, idea of, or this expectancy, kind of waiting for something without waiting, actually. It's as if there's, it's always, obvious, works like Lounge and Location series as well, that, something has happened there, a kind of a disaster has taken place probably, and everyone has disappeared from the scene. But then you get this spooky feeling, really, and as if, there should be someone there, but they are all disappeared. And so instead of using this word uncanny for such a sense of being within your installations, for myself, actually, I prefer to use the, spectral art. I wonder your, response to that, really. I'm calling it spectral because, since we talked about ghosts yesterday, and I forgot that, but you talk about some ghosts with relationship to your artworks, and hence this, idea of spectrality will be probably more suitable, for your works, for the sense of, waiting for something without waiting, and, being immersed into, this is empty space, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I hope that I can take the viewer, especially in the large-scale installations. I hope I can motivate the viewer to have this quiet moment without any. If you're waiting, then obviously you're waiting for something. So you're kind of killing time, and I would say I hope to stage a situation in which you embrace a form of timelessness. You know, like sometimes you're sitting in a motorway restaurant and you're gazing at the cars driving past, and you're just sitting there with your coffee, and it's a moment that you're not performing a personality. You're not at your job, you're not with your kids, you're not the son of or the daughter of, you're just sitting there, and somehow you dissolve into the moment and into the scenery. And this is something that you could say like is a non-narrative zone, or a zone of timelessness, as if time is standing still or frozen. And I think in these moments we might be in touch with something very profound, because it is not language tamed, or it's not tamed through thinking or logic. Because anything that we experience, if we later on tell it to someone else, we structure it with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And in these moments that you dissolve into a moment of quietness, then there is a kind of, I presume, something essential. You are with the world. You're small and you're nothing and everything at the same time, so somehow. And I think these moments are quite beautiful, and it's something I hope that can take place in what I do, because I can't offer any answers or solutions to any big questions. But I can try to stage something that has something essential in it, and funnily enough, I'm trying to do that with the most banal of objects. So when I talked about the motorway restaurant, I made a life-size motorway restaurant, a diner. And in Belgium we have those that bridge the highway. So you climb the stairs, or you take the elevator or the escalator, and you find yourself in a motorway restaurant overlooking a highway. And this is something I produced as a sculpture or an installation. And it's a permanent work at the Towada Art Center in Japan. And so now I know that every day there are some Japanese people sitting in a non-functional motorway restaurant looking at a deserted highway. And the deserted highway is a sculpture of 20 meters deep. It's made with an exaggerated perspective. So it's produced in a slant, so it climbs towards the horizon. The road narrows down, the streetlights get smaller and smaller towards the horizon. And when you sit in there, you have the feeling it's like kilometers deep. And it is night, it's a staged night. And the museum, of course, is open during museum hours. So during broad daylight, you go into the museum and you can sit down in a fake Belgian night in a motorway restaurant where you can't drink coffee. And through a window, you look at an empty highway. So it's a monstrous or a gigantic non-event. It's a total non-event. Right. If someone from Mars would look at us, sitting in a fake motorway restaurant, looking at a fake motorway or highway, and taking it serious, that would be quite ridiculous, you know.
Yes.
So they would go like, "What are you Earthlings doing there?" It doesn't make any sense. Still, as is the case for a novel, which is also a construction, if you take the proposition by the writer or by the visual artist seriously, if you're receptive for it, it can become true. And if that happens, it's something quite magical, because it is like highlighting or putting a spotlight on things that normally during the day are of great unimportance. And then you present them as something of importance. And I think this is something that I try to do, is to make something ordinary out of the ordinary. So to make something ordinary exceptional, by transforming it, by making an interpretation and trying to shape it in a way that it becomes content. It is like, you know, if my mother, who is an amateur painter, would paint this bottle and these two glasses, it might deliver something that we can consider a painting, but not necessarily art, with all my respect for my mom. But if Giorgio Morandi would paint it, it would be a painting that talks about nothing, but also about everything in an essential way. because he uses a palette, colors, intimacy, the slightly nervous line of his brushstroke, turn it into content. And I think this is also what a novelist does. A novelist can write a novel about a seemingly very banal family, but he can turn it into content by the way he approaches it. He makes the interpretation, the descriptions, the psychological drawing. And as you were mentioning Carver, things that are unsaid are mostly more important than the things that are said, or the clumsy way that we talk sometimes. I often start to talk about the weather just to break the ice. Talking about the weather is content zero. A bottle and 2 glasses is content zero. But Morandi makes it into content.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the expression, the power of expression changes situations as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, or it builds up a kind of a form, which is necessary for it to be considered as art, actually. And would you like to refer to your work at location 6, for example, with respect to what you talked about here? I mean, this diorama.
Yes. Once I made a very big construction. It's 4 meters high and 18 meters diameter. And it refers to the old tradition of the panorama. You know, the historic panoramas, paintings, circular paintings that surround you as a viewer. We have loads of them throughout Europe, and mostly they depicted landscapes, like big views on areas. Like
they date back to 19th century, right? Or at the beginning of right before the invention of the film. And
it was a form of spectacle.
Yes.
But of course, if we human beings try to stage infinity, it's always to some extent ridiculous. Because climb any mountain and look around and you will always have a way more spectacular panorama than we can ever manage to paint. So there's something tragic about it. But I like that. I like the clumsiness of human beings. I think this is how I can still sympathize with us as human beings. If we were all very radical and straightforward and didn't make mistakes, that would be very sad, you know, and strange and ethically problematical. But the clumsiness in how we try to stage things, it's like, you know, when I grew up in Belgium, we had a small house and we had a garden, and it was just about this size. And there was just some lawn, and there were 2 kitschy birch trees, and we had a turtle and some rabbits. And the garden was fenced off with concrete slabs, you know, like really depressing fences. So if I look in retrospect, it was like a prison somehow. But it was our little paradise. And so this was the clumsy way of my parents to stage our little paradise. And it's kind of ugly, but also beautiful by its clumsiness. And so I did include quite a lot of that nonsense and that clumsiness in my installations. Now the snow panorama, location 6 is this cylinder-shaped construction, and so through a long tunnel you're guided to the very heart of the installation. You can sit down in a small observatory, and then there's a circular window, and you're surrounded by an infinite snow landscape. And funnily enough, I also show that work in Singapore, where they never ever get to see snow.
Yeah.
So I remember my team and I were there installing the fake snow in Singapore. And how kitsch can you get, you know? Using fake snow is hilarious. But we sculpted the snow landscape, and the first trees were very big and the last ones very tiny. So again, you had the impression that you were really in the middle of a big deserted or depopulated snow landscape. And so by itself, it's 100% nonsense, you know? It's silly and it's clumsy. But because there's some fog drifting through the landscape and everything is white, again, it's an evocation, it's not a simulation. So the bark of the tree was white as well. So I always interpret also when it comes to the use of colors. So it was undeniably a fake snow landscape, yet people sat down in it for a very long time and took it serious. And this is the beauty of art. You know, when I look at an old landscape painting from a couple of 100 years ago, of course I know at all times it's just a millimeter of paint on canvas or wood. But if I accept a proposition by the painter, I can really mentally be in there. And And this is a capacity that we have as human beings to take fiction for something authentic. And I think that's just a marvelous thing that we...
And enjoy it, right?
Yes, enjoy it, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And next, I mean, maybe it's a good idea to talk about the place of silence in your works, because I think it's a rather remarkable concept with respect to your works, especially, for example, your video Staging Silence, and also the Sea of Tranquility, for example, or the silent piano, which we can see here on the second floor, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, would you like to talk about the place of silence in your works?
Yes, when I made the movie Staging Silence, someone was a little upset and came up to me and said...
I was upset too, I mean, just because, I mean...
And said, why is there music in that film? Because it's called Staging Silence. So I expected a quiet movie without sound. And then I explained, as I did to you yesterday, that silence in my conception is not only about the absence of sound, but it's rather about a mental state. It's about a form of tranquility, a form of absence. And so in this film, you see worlds that are constructed by two pairs of anonymous hands, and on a film set of 1 square meter, they construct landscapes and interiors before your eye. And then you see the construction. It's so clear, it's undenied, it's fully shown. So then that's not an issue anymore. So it's like in the theater, it's just a stage and actors, so you know the conditions you depart from as a spectator. And when you accept this, you can surrender to the fiction and surrender to what is being staged. And what I try to stage indeed is a form of mental silence. Like thoughts might be crisscrossing your mind, but it's about a specific feeling rather than about a literal silence. But upstairs you will see some sculptures of characters, like two sculptures of girls, and there's a sculpture of a woman, and I made sculptures of adults and kids, and they are executed in this kind of concrete-like material. And because of that, they seem to be frozen in a moment. There's a sculpture of a girl blowing a soap bubble, and she's just blowing it, and the soap bubble is almost going its own way. And so you freeze this moment, which is something very simple, like a soap bubble is also something that was used in the Vanitas tradition as a metaphor for the shortness of our lives, and like the soap bubble only exists for a couple of seconds and then it's gone. And by freezing gestures like blowing a soap bubble, I think you give a very specific form of silence to that. It's something very ephemerical, something like a soap bubble is gone in no time, and by freezing it you give a certain value to it, or a certain seriousness to this almost non-event of a soap bubble being blown by a girl. The characters also have their eyes closed, so the sleeping girl sculpture, the girl that blows a soap bubble, and the young woman who is listening to music with her eyes closed. The three characters have their eyes closed, so you're not confronted with them, and they themselves are in a kind of cocoon. They're in their own world and in their own thoughts. And since we always identify with a character in a novel or in a movie or with a sculpture, I hope that somehow, even when you look at them, that you also feel yourself as if you had your eyes closed. So I try to create pictures that stimulate you to find this quietness in the frozen moment that I offer in the sculpture.
But at any rate, I mean, silence is not silent for you, I believe.
Well, yes, true silence does not exist, or you have to construct something crazy, like like a scientific construction to have the absolute absence of silence. But I've heard that people that experience that, they really got crazy because it's unbearable.
It's not, I mean, expensible actually. It's the full silence and pure silence. There's nothing like that really at all. I mean, you know, considering your heartbeats, you know, the isolation rooms, people are put into those isolation rooms that in the end, you know, feeling as if they are in a full silence, you start, you know, hearing your own heartbeat, which makes it impossible really to put you into a pure, I mean, absolute kind of experience of silence. Anyway, all right. So I mean, well, I was thinking about. I mean, I'm not going to make comparison, of course, but I don't want you to make comparison at all. But since I'm very much considered with in your work upstairs is silent piano, and you know, I mean, Joseph Beuys made a series of silent pianos in 1950s, and so he covered up, you know, pianos with felt, with some red cross on them. And in one of his, you know, interviews, he was saying something like that. You know, I mean, please don't take my, you know, expression as a one-to-one, you know, expression which is made by Joseph Beuys. But as far as I remember, he says something like that. You know, since the art has enclosed itself into some kind of envelope with this right cross on it. It means to say that we should be expressing whatever we should be expressing right at this moment. So it was a clear message to the audience by Joseph Beuys. And it was pure silence actually, though. I mean, you know, this felt-covered piano, which can't be played at all. So it was a kind of invitation to silence, but it was to show us that we are living in pure silence at the moment, and we should start expressing ourselves. And what would you take on that, really?
Well, I don't know Joseph Beuys' intentions, but I think I would never try to express like a straightforward message to the viewer, simply because I don't know any better than anyone else. So I did refer to urgent subjects, you know, like in my Sea of Tranquility project, I talked about shopping malls and gated communities and the economy, the globalized economy and all that. So I'm not afraid to include references to nowadays subjects. Yet I don't want to comment or to tell the spectator, hey, we should be doing this or we should be doing that, because I don't know. I never felt that I had to, in a paternalizing way, to judge or to say to the audience that we should be doing this or that. Simply because I'm just someone who makes mistakes, and like anyone else, who am I to, you know, to pretend I know better? So I don't have clear messages in that regard. So the silent piano upstairs is more like a silenced down functional object. As I always do my work, it's really like by sculpting it, you make an interpretation, and like a sculpted chair is not a chair anymore, but it's a representation of a chair. And of course it is nice that you can't play music on it, because then the music is suggested. It's like the sculpture Fatima upstairs. The girl has the music in her ears, and we can only presume what she's listening to. We have no idea what she's listening to.
Wow. Yeah. Considering your work, I mean, Horizon, this upstairs, I mean, one of those sculptures, but which looks like a canvas, right?
Yes.
And where the horizon, line of horizon has almost disappeared. And maybe only the line of horizon is being visible there, but rest of everything has disappeared. And I mean, would you, I mean, relate it to your indulgence for romanticism, or is it something like that, or am I exaggerating things?
Well, I presume I'm a romantic.
Okay.
Or a post-romantic or a neo-romantic or so. Although, of course, when we look at romanticism historically, then it talks about the sublime of nature. It talks about how small we are as human beings in relation to the force of nature. And so I wouldn't say that in a historical sense I'm romantic, but for sure there are affinities when it comes to the reflection on the human condition. To, like, you could say that the whole exhibition here is a kind of a memento mori. It is a reminder of our mortality. It is about life and the value of small things. It is a reflection on our short, ridiculously short time on Earth. So, but I'm not a pessimist, or I'm not. I'm rather someone who loves to highlight or to put a spotlight on the small things and show that they are of importance. And the side of being a post-neo-romantic person, probably, I'm probably also a very corny man. So I believe small gestures are of great importance. And so there's some sculptures upstairs of hands performing small gestures, because simply I think they make the whole difference in a lifetime. So
Right.
it is about that very meeting that you have with this one person. It is about this small gesture of someone quietly putting a cup of tea aside of you when you're writing. It is these things that are of tremendous importance in life as we experience it.
As far as I remember, it was one of the Kaurismäki brothers from Finland. Are you familiar with some, these Finnish filmmakers, the
No.
Kaurismäki brothers? And one of them said that, with regard to his films, that when there is no hope left, there is no room for pessimism at all.
Yes. Well, I would rather conceive life or see life as tragicomical or absurd.
All right.
But of course, if you consider everything absurd, then you have ethical problems, because then why would you bother for anything? So, this kind of absurdity is not mine, but to some extent, of course, the human condition is absurd. And but I fully embrace this idea of the tragicomical way to see life. So I'm not overly tragic in my reception of the world and life. I'm not a pessimist, but I always see both sides. And so when I try to write, when I wrote my play for the Schauspiel Frankfurt in Germany, I also tried to include both sides. Like, there were very serious monologues, but also ridiculous conversations. And so I like this alternation. And many of my big installations that maybe in a first glance seem to be very serious, they contain a lot of wings, if you're open for it, if you want to discover them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we, still have the time? I'm not quite sure really, but...
I don't know.
But I'm very much pleased to, present Hans Oplebeck to you today. And of course there are lots of other things that we can talk about, and maybe, some of you would like to ask Hans your own questions about his, style, or his works and attitude in arts. Any questions? We haven't talked about Vanitas actually, your Vanitas works, and or the gestures. And in the gestures works, which some examples of which we're going to see today upstairs, we have some gestures coming out of the room's walls, and we can see only some parts of the bodies there, some arm, for example, or some gesture coming into being. And of course, I thought about when I considered this series of gestures, I've thought about this, Renaissance claim to the body, actually, this perfectly bodily organization where everything is in its own place. We have the full presentation of a body. Whereas when you come, to your work as a series of gestures, we only see some parts of it really, and hence the fragments of some fragments of a body. And so, I mean, is there a special interest in your work about producing fragments in a romanticist way, or how do you get this idea of, you know, using such, you know, gestures, you know, pointing to a kind of a, you know, saturation of a movement within an act of form?
Yes, I'm not a portraitist, so when I would sculpt a human figure in a way that it has to represent or be similar to the person it departed from. I like the idea of an anonymous person. So upstairs you see the sculpture of the girl blowing a soap bubble, and it could be any girl somehow. So I like the notion of anonymity somehow. They also have their eyes closed, so they're not making contact, and so they're quiet appearances. And but what I do love is hands. So of course I use my hands all the time, and I think hands are really, yeah, beautiful things or an arm to freeze a gesture, to freeze a notion of something doing something for you. It's like the sculpture of a hand offering you a saucer with blackberries on it. It is as if it very quietly comes out of the wall and offers it to you. And this discretion, this very calm and quiet way of offering something in a quiet, unspectacular way is something I like more than if the whole body would be there, it would be more dramatic or so. And this is a very quiet way of arms coming out of the wall and just doing something very small that you can recognize.
In a very gentle movement, actually,
and it is anonymous. And I started to sculpt a human figure, and I started to make videos with a lot of people in it, when at some point I felt too comfortable making depopulated spaces. I thought, okay, by now I know how to make an empty highway, or by now I know how to make a depopulated...
Okay, that explains that, right?
And then I thought, well, I have to challenge myself, and I even made videos with 800 people in it, so it's really packed. So it's really, sometimes a formal aspect or idea helps me to challenge myself to make something really new. And it could be simply like, okay, let's do a film with a lot of people in it.
Right. Thank you very much, Hans.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.